The NCAA has relaxed its marijuana testing threshold. It is recommending lighter penalties for positive tests. This is something where this is a quote. Reconsidering the NCAA approach to cannabis testing and management is consistent with feedback from the membership on how to better support and educate student athletes in a society with the rapidly evolving public health and cultural views on cannabis use. He also noted that marijuana is, quote, not considered a performance-enhancing substance. I had always been under the impression that sometimes these positive pot tests, if they become like a real issue at high-level college football, and especially, Bud, I know you've been talking to coaches a lot this offseason. Tell me if you think otherwise. When it leads to suspensions, I've always gotten the sense there's something else there. Like the coach is mad that you failed this test because there's all these other things that you also are not doing. There's a list of standards that you are not meeting, and that marijuana was a part of it. But for the NCAA as a whole to relax its standards, I guess does seem in line with, as the NCAA is saying, more of the public behavior around cannabis use.
So the main thing here is that this is not school testing, right? Like this rule change for the NCAA does not like basically cover school testing. The NCAA already tells the schools, hey, police this how you want, right? Like have a policy. But as we saw in like the Mark Richt versus Urban Meyer years, some schools have very different policies. At Florida, it's like, or it was like first test, Stern talking to, second test, like, all right, run a lap, third test, no ice cream, and on and on and on, whereas Georgia was suspending guys. However, at NCAA sanctioned events like college football playoff or back in the BCS championship game era or the NCAA tournament or any kind of postseason play that the NCAA is involved in, they had some pretty draconian policies here. In fact, on the first test, it used to be under the old rule, you would lose half a year, right? This happened to Matthew Thomas at Florida State, Danny, if you recall. They had a really good linebacker, and it was always like, hey, do not get caught smoking weed at the bowl game. Bowl games are as well, because it's technically postseason play. So from my understanding of the rule change, which would be what? No penalty for the first test, no penalty for the second test if you comply with the management plan. If you're non-compliant, you lose a quarter of the season, which I think is still silly, but whatever. It's a big step forward. These guys should not lose a half a year because they go home and smoke a bowl before going back to play in their bowl.
So did you practice
That's a good line?
I did not. I just thought of that. In my head, I'm like, yeah, it sounds like
off the dome. See, that's what happens when you've been smoking weed. Like those kind of thoughts come into your brain.
I mean, so do you sense there's not going to be a whole lot of impact on college football then?
I think we're just going to have less or fewer of these stories. Michigan State had a guy in the tournament that got popped for this too a couple of years back. If you guys recall it, we're just going to have less of those stories. Like this is actually a good thing the NCAA is doing, in my opinion. Hey, we don't need to suspend somebody for half of their games because they smoked a little weed. It's silly. And I don't really know why.
For doing this thing that is completely legal in a lot of the country.
Correct.
Coke had an interesting note, though, on here. He said WADA considers cannabis a PED right now. And Sha'Carri Richardson, the sprinter from LSU, remember, she was the one who wasn't allowed because of a positive drug test. Now, it's interesting that the NCAA says it's not a PED. And then there's all kind of jokes about, hey, like how it could be considered a PED or not,
The only people who think weed is a PED are people who've never smoked weed. Right. There is nothing about the effects of marijuana that's like, I'm going to run faster and work harder. It's supposed to just like, yeah, no, I'm cool just sitting here.
What if you're a competitive sleeper? I mean, there's strands that can help with that, I'm sure.
I think it's interesting, though, because it's, like a lot of issues, I've sort of evolved my views on a lot of them. Gambling, I mean, marijuana, even like the transfer, like I used to be more old school, like, hey, you shouldn't transfer and you had to graduate. And, if you get caught smoking marijuana, you should be suspended, like all of it. And gambling, we should never, have that legalized. I used to be that way. And then, you sort of get older and you take in more and you see what's happening across society and you interact with more people. And you see more cases that just don't make sense. And like you guys are saying, like, is it really in where it's 20 states where I'm sure you guys, I was just in California and you can walk in and you can buy marijuana just like you can buy a 6-pack of beer. I mean, it's pretty nuts. And the prevalence at which it's takes place on college campuses, much like alcohol. And then you dive deeper into well, what's the difference between alcohol and marijuana? And, you go down that rabbit hole, and it's like, well, why do we treat this one so much differently? And I've talked to coaches about this. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago. And, I had one coach tell me that it was one of the biggest challenges on his team was keeping players clean to make sure they didn't test positive. And so much so that he had a parent that was like, what are you doing? Like, my kid's gonna smoke weed when he comes home. Like, this is what we do as a family. Like, it's what, it's just part of our culture. It's what happens. Why is he like almost upset and getting angry that he potentially could lose time for marijuana? And and I understand the frustration. So I think this will be a big sigh of relief for a lot of coaches. Like, that's one less headache that keeps them awake on a weekend or after the drug test results come back. Like, oh, geez, we got to have, here we go again, where it didn't make much sense. It was a little bit antiquated, and just the way our society is moving, it seems like the NCAA is trying to move in the right direction. Maybe it was an easy win for the NCAA. Because they needed one bad, and they go like, here you go, we're forward thinking now, but it's probably just going to ease a lot of stress from the college coaches.
I think,
well
done, Dennis. I think that was one of Charlie Strong's issues at Texas. By the way,
they're like, hey, like, what's the big deal?
What were you saying, bud?
I think that was one of Charlie Strong's issues at Texas, caring too much if guys smoked.
Ooh.
Yeah, see, that's one of those things. Like, I feel like a lot of the times coaches have rules where it's like no weed, but it's not so much the impact of the weed, although I guess some of them probably have some concerns about, it's going to make you lazy and whatever. But I think a lot of it is just a discipline kind of thing where it's like, no, these are the rules. You want to be here. Are you willing to follow the rules? Are you an OKG? Like, you're going to follow the discipline and the rules that we have set forth.
Like the P chart. Are you hydrated enough? Do you have championship level hydration? The sacrifice, asking your players to make sacrifices and not indulge in things that
for the team. Yep.
Yeah. That are going to make them happy and that might be temptations, and just to do it for the team to create that. What, Danny?
It just feels like a scene out of Varsity. I remember in high school, it was like, all right, none of us are going to drink, no alcohol during football. And then get to October, there's like a great party. You're like, just one time we'll have a couple beers, but it is all about and that's what the coaches want you to buy into. And they'll take it as far as social media. Remember, Jimbo did that at Florida State. It was like, hey, let's at least, I think Dabo might have too, like during the football season, no social media. None of us are going to tweet. Like, it is about buying into the team. But then that becomes, all right, good. You try to do it at your school. Good luck if you want to do it, but it shouldn't be forced upon everybody. So it's a good thing.
Well, congratulations to college football players who want to enjoy some of their time at the end of the regular season, because as Bud Elliott said, you're not going to jeopardize your bowl for smoking a bowl with the new NCAA policies.
Oh, we got to get that on a shirt. That's a good one.